Austin 316 says I just whipped your ass.
What's up everybody, Dusty here. Now I've never attempted to hide the fact that I was a pretty big wrestling fan growing up, although in my defense, I never had much of a choice.
I'm straight out the trailer!
My acquiring of actual consciousness essentially overlapped with the rise of Stone Cold The Rock and that whole Attitude Era you may have heard about, and to make matters worse, both of my parents had also been wrestling fans, so whereas some kids had shamefully watched in secret, I was being gifted VHSs that allowed me to memorize a lot of this man's promos before I had even learned how to read.
The Rock talks trash in his sleep, just like this. Rudy Pook and the
But the one thing that I loved even more than watching wrestling was playing the games, and that's probably largely due to the fact that little baby boy Dusty got to come up during the golden age of wrestling games. WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy are considered all-time classics, and with both of those games serving as my introduction to the genre, I've been chasing that high ever since. I couldn't even tell you how many hours were spent in various games, teaming up with or squaring off against my sister, dad, and friends throughout my childhood, and even when my interest in watching oiled-up shirtless dudes play fight was at an all-time low during my teenage years, I still usually had a rough idea of what was going on in WWE thanks to their games. It wasn't just the WWE games that caught my eye though. From the absolute tire fires like Simpsons Wrestling to the unexpected classics like Def Jam Vendetta,
I'ma take your tongue out and lick my ass with it!
and all the mediocre stuff in between, if there was a wrestling game on a platform I owned, I usually found a way to check it out. And with all that being said, I can confidently tell you all that over the past 25 years, I'd never played anything quite like Wrestling Empire. Part wrestling game, part social simulator, and completely batshit insane. Playing Wrestling Empire feels like playing through a fever dream cooked up by a 6-year-old with their action figures after they spent the previous night binge watching vintage Adult Swim. Now, if I'm being completely honest, I only kinda sorta know what I'm doing during matches. Their graphics look like they were pulled from some PS 1.5 prototype that never saw the light of day, and the whole thing feels like it's being held together with duct tape and willpower. But despite all these issues, I can't quit playing the damn thing. And to illustrate why, we're gonna cover the first few months in the career of the Dust. Our story kicks off in December of 1989 when the Dust is a fresh-faced young 18-year-old with ambitions of making it as wrestling's next big superstar. While he had a lot of athletic potential, there was still a lot of work to be done, and what better place to learn the basics than wrestling school. Unfortunately, Matt Black here wasn't exactly thrilled at having the honor of being the Dust's first opponent, and the young rookie quickly learns the old saying that this isn't ballet is 100% accurate, as the salty old veteran does his best to convince the newcomer to quit. But the Dust would show a tremendous amount of heart and refuse to back down, ultimately emerging from his first match with a hard-fought victory, and like newbie Nate said afterwards, this was the best possible start to his career. The next week, before the show, Coach Emerson calls the Dust into his office to give him a brief rundown on what to expect in his new life as a professional wrestler.
Nothing but garbage, Gaina.
Once that's taken care of, the Dust helps himself to some unclaimed floor pizza, as one does, then finds a guitar, so he decides to entertain the boys, although it quickly becomes apparent that not everybody appreciates the show.
Boo! You stink!
A wild brawl ensues, which the Dust promptly dips out of as he had to worry about a rematch with Matt Black. However, despite his big talk, the balding bastard went down for the count even quicker than he had in their first matchup. With 2 victories under his belt, the Dust was beginning to build some momentum for himself, but he might have been getting a little too comfortable. The next week, he's enjoying a cigarette in a public bathroom, which I've been told numerous times was your God-given right as an American back in 1989, but it becomes clear that he was just doing this to fit in with the boys as he winds up puking all over himself. Then to make matters even worse, when he heads over to the vending machine to grab a quick pick-me-up before his match, the damn thing just suddenly explodes out of nowhere. Somehow, the Dust recovers quick enough to make his call time, but once he arrives in the ring, Coach Emerson lets him know that the non-existent fans have apparently voted for this to be a last man standing match. Now, to his credit, the Dust puts up one hell of a fight, and on more than one occasion, it looks like he might even be able to escape with a victory, but he was fighting an uphill battle from the start, and when his double axe handle to the outside is countered into an arm drag, he ends up walking away with his first loss.
The streak is over!
But what's far more concerning is that it appears like he might have suffered an injury, as he has some difficulty getting to the back once the match is over, but luckily this turned out to be a false alarm, and the Dust wouldn't have to be pulled from the upcoming holiday show, where he was scheduled to take part in a 19-man Christmas Chaos match. While the Dust was excited he'd have the opportunity to showcase his skills in front of a live audience for the very first time, he had absolutely no idea what he was truly in for. Seeing a Christmas Chaos match, the ring and surrounding area are littered with a bunch of gifts, which can be opened, and the contestants are free to utilize any of the goodies they may contain. Glass tubes, briefcases, crutches, and window panes all made an appearance, and it didn't take long for the Dust to discover that these might have been among the least of his worries. But despite simply acting as the referee, Coach Emerson somehow ended up getting the worst of it. When sliding out of the ring to count a pin, he apparently rolled onto some sort of explosive, losing his right arm in the process. But after this, nobody would ever be able to question the trainer's dedication to the business, as it only took him a few moments to collect what was left of himself and start making the count with his bloody stump. And again, I have to point out that this was a 19-man gauntlet match. Coach's injury happened just over 4 minutes into it, and the first elimination didn't occur until just under the 9-minute mark, so the poor bastard was in for a long night. Sadly, the same couldn't be said for the Dust, as he would end up being the second competitor eliminated, and while initially disappointed that he was unable to go the distance, considering he was still able to walk away in one piece, it might have been a blessing in disguise. Although there's no telling what type of psychological trauma had been inflicted. I mean, Crucial Kennedy was so distraught by what had happened to Emerson that he somehow gaslit himself into thinking he was responsible, despite the fact that he wasn't even in the match at the time of the accident. As the year drew to a close, the Dust celebrated his birthday. In 1990 would kick off with him being called into Emerson's office and asked if he's ever thought about switching up his entrance music. Now, truth be told, the Dust wasn't really that into the new song that the coach was suggesting, but I mean, just how the hell was he supposed to say no after what Emerson had just been through? Right after the meeting ends, the Dust receives a phone call from someone who lets him know how much they love his new music, and while I know it's supposed to be from one of his fellow wrestlers, the fact that the game gives no indication who's on the other end of the conversation, and the timing of it all, just makes him come across as some super obsessed stalker.
I'm watching you, you bitch. You're gonna die tonight!
The Dust began the new year with a victory in an otherwise unremarkable match against Win Stevenson. Then, after the show, he's confronted by Vendetta in the bathroom, who attempts to convince him to turn heel, or be a bad guy, but the Dust refused to turn his back on his loyal Dust addicts. Then, when he's about to turn in for the night, he's called to do an interview, which quickly descends into him shitting all over another wrestler who he'd never worked with or even met before, because that's just Wrestling 101. The next week, the Dust is called back into Emerson's office, who succeeds where Vendetta had failed by convincing the Dust into abandoning the Dust addicts, and then immediately after, he talks of the benefits of PEDs and offers the Dust a really great deal. Now at this point, it's blatantly obvious that Emerson is just using his injury to take advantage of the natural sympathy it generates for him, but even though he's able to recognize that he's being guilt-tripped, the Dust still can't find the heart to actually turn his coach down, so despite his reservations, he ends up taking the steroids and wastes little time putting them to use. I mean, if you pay for something, you might as well get your money's worth after all, but not everybody in the locker room felt the same way, as right before what's supposed to have been a friendly little exhibition, Wuri decided to go into business for himself and expose the Dust's use of steroids to the audience. Now granted, there weren't actually any fans in attendance, but it's the principle of the thing. I mean, Wuri was supposed to be one of my boys. So during the encounter, when the Dust spotted that somebody had left a bag of thumbtacks at ringside, our protagonist saw the perfect opportunity to enact a little revenge. See, hitting your opponent with a bag of thumbtacks is illegal, but there's nothing in the rulebook stopping you from just spraying them all over the ring if you want. Now just to be clear, the Dust had just intended to inflict a little bit of extra damage upon Wuri. It's not like thumbtacks are a mainstay of most wrestling promotions, but they will pop up on occasion, and they're usually safe enough. So the Dust was absolutely horrified when Wuri took a really awkward landing during a back suplex onto the tacks, and ended up having half of his arm ripped off. Although Wuri at least had the good sense to stay down, so the match mercifully came to its conclusion. But while extremely traumatized by what he had just seen, the reason the Dust currently has a 1,000-yard stare wasn't actually because of what happened to Wuri, but rather he had somehow managed to seriously mess himself up while going for the pin. It really wasn't a good sign when the dude who just lost his arm is on his feet and out of the ring first. I'm happy to report though, that was just another false alarm. Sadly, it turns out that Wuri wasn't nearly as lucky and ended up dying as a result of the injuries he sustained during the match. So now you can add survivor's guilt onto the list of things that the Dust had to worry about, although a few callous individuals quickly let it be known that they weren't nearly as conflicted about this recent development. But when the Dust shows up at Wuri's funeral to pay his respects, it's made very clear by some in attendance that his presence isn't entirely welcome. And when it's announced that there's going to be an interpromotional charity show where the Dust will get the chance to square off against one half of Rising Sun Purusu's tag team champions, it certainly didn't help squash the rumors that Wuri's death had been intentional. However, nobody seemed to question the fact that Coach Emerson had gotten reconstructive surgery for his missing arm, and the timing of it all seems a little convenient if you ask me.
I live on through this arm!
Before his match, the Dust runs into Hollywood big shot Blockbuster backstage, who attempts to throw his weight around, but the Dust lets him know that he's not going to take that crap. All things things considered though, he's feeling pretty good leading up to his match with Turrican, but that quickly changes when Coach Emerson knocks him off the turnbuckle and sends him crashing through the steel steps before the match even kicks off. It takes a few minutes, but the Dust manages to compose himself and even do the promo he had prepared, but my worst fears are realized when it's confirmed that he did indeed suffer a serious injury as a result of the fall. However, Turrican's partner, Killer Corrado, sucker punches the Dust as soon as the match starts, but this backfires tremendously as it apparently pops something back into place, significantly improving the Dust's condition, and he's eventually able to pick up the victory after a tough back and forth contest. There's little time to celebrate though, as immediately after the match, Emerson confronts the Dust, informing him that his injury hadn't been an accident and that he intends to finish the job. Luckily, one of the Dust boys, newbie Nate, is nearby and jumps into the fray, allowing the Dust to skate away to safety. However, Emerson would soon begin to use his power to drive a wedge between the two allies as he'd booked them in a series of matches against one another, including a Shark Tank match, which was clearly just a blatant attempt to get one of them to kill the other. And on top of all this, he also just did his best to stir up shit between the two whenever possible.
Don't forget, he called ye yellow.
Tensions were at an all-time high between the Dust and Emerson, and things would eventually come to a head when Emerson attempted to phase the Dust out of the wrestling business altogether by letting him know that if he didn't get his stamina up to what Emerson deemed to be acceptable, then there would be no place at the school for him. And while the Dust diligently went to work improving his cardio, it would turn out to be completely unnecessary, as he would soon find himself being freed from the petty tyranny of Coach Emerson as a representative from Hollywood came knocking to offer the Dust his first professional contract. Now, it should be noted that the pay was god-awful, and they were clearly attempting to sabotage his career before it could even get off the ground by paying him to eat pins. However, the Dust was able to renegotiate for slightly better terms, where he'd only be paid each match if he actually managed to win, which Thomas' son here was happy to accept, as I'm sure he thought he was about to get 7 weeks of free labor. But if hunger wasn't motivation enough, then the fact that the Dust was scheduled for a hardcore match against his old acquaintance Blockbuster certainly lit a fire under him. See, while what happened to Wuri might have been a horrific tragedy that nobody intended, the same couldn't be said for what was about to happen to Blockbuster's bitch ass. Less than 15 minutes into the match, the Dust had already managed to lop off one of Blockbuster's arms with a chainsaw. And kids, this is why you shouldn't be a bully. You never know who's got that dog in them.
Look at you now, boy! Ah! Look at you now!
Once the Hollywood A-lister had been completely disarmed, it was time for some good old-fashioned comedy spots as the Dust beat Blockbuster over the head with his own arm bone. And that's just a taste of the good old-fashioned family-friendly fun we offer here at Hollywood Wrestling, folks. Blockbuster puts up as much of a fight as he can, but I mean, there's only so much he can do. To his credit though, even after getting Anakin Skywalkered, Blockbuster still had the audacity to claim that the ref had screwed him over and demand that the match be restarted. The Dust was more than happy to accept the challenge, and this went about as well for Blockbuster as you'd expect. And now, after all the hard work, after all the sacrifices, after all the maimings and accidental manslaughter, the Dust had finally picked up his first win in a major wrestling promotion. And you know what? It had all been worth it to hear the roar of the crowd and know that he now truly had the right to call himself a professional wrestler. Considering the turbulent nature of his first few months in the industry, he was already anticipating running into more speed bumps down the line, but for one night at least, he knew what it felt like to be on top of the mountain. Hey everybody, Dusty here, and I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you didn't, well, I've got no clue why you'd still be hanging about, like what are you even doing? But if you did enjoy it, then why not leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel so that you can be kept up to date with all my latest content. Or don't, you know, don't let me tell you how to live your life. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching, I'm out.